My name is Evelyn Harper ***. I'm 42, and I work as a structural engineer. The day my husband's son looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't real family, and that I had 48 hours to leave my own home, everything I thought I had built collapsed like a bridge designed on lies. I didn't just lose my husband that month, I lost the illusion that I had ever truly belonged anywhere. And if you've ever spent years reinforcing something fragile, pouring yourself into it, believing it's solid, only to watch it crack under weight you didn't even know was there, then you already understand more than you want to. The house went quiet after Daniel died. Not peaceful quiet, not the kind you get on a Sunday morning when sunlight pools on the kitchen floor and coffee smells like comfort. This was the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, the kind that reminds you someone is missing every second. It was late October when we buried him. Cold but not freezing. I remember the way the wind moved through the trees at the cemetery like it had somewhere else to be. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world didn't stop. You always think it will. Daniel was 58, a heart attack, sudden, no warning signs that mattered until they did. One minute he was standing in the kitchen complaining about the coffee being too weak, the next he was on the floor. I still hear the sound of the mug hitting the tile sometimes. I called 911. I did CPR. I counted compressions like I was solving an equation, steady, controlled, mechanical, because that's what I do. I solve problems, I fix things. But some structures fail no matter how well you respond. He died before the ambulance arrived. And I remember sitting there afterward, my hands shaking, staring at the place where his head had been, thinking, I don't know how to rebuild from this. Before all of that, before the grief, before the betrayal, I was someone who believed in systems. In my job, everything comes down to load, stress, balance. You calculate what something can Arabic ta, Arabic het, Arabic meme, Arabic lam, what it can carry, and you design accordingly. If something fails, it's because something was misjudged. That's how I saw family too. You support each other, you distribute the weight. At least that's what I thought. When I met Daniel, I was 34. He was already established, confident in a way that felt steady, not arrogant. He had a son, Marcus, who was 19 at the time. Marcus didn't like me from the beginning. He never said it outright, not at first, but you don't need words to recognize strain in a structure. You feel it, subtle shifts, tiny fractures. The way he'd leave the room when I entered, the way he'd call me Evelyn instead of anything warmer, the way conversations would stop just a second too early when I walked in. I told myself it was normal. I wasn't his mother, I wasn't trying to be, I just wanted to fit somewhere in the blueprint. Daniel would squeeze my hand and say, give him time, he's adjusting. So I gave time. Years of it. I cooked dinners Marcus wouldn't eat. I went to his college graduation even though he barely acknowledged me. I sat through holidays where I felt like a guest in my own life. Once on Thanksgiving, this was maybe 2016, I spent 6 hours cooking, turkey, stuffing, everything from scratch. I remember standing in the kitchen, wiping my hands on a towel, watching Marcus push the food around his plate. It's fine, he said when Daniel asked if he liked it. Fine. That word felt like a hairline crack, running through something that should have been solid. Later that night, Daniel found me in the kitchen again, cleaning. You didn't have to do all this, he said softly. I wanted to, I told him. And I meant it. Because I thought if I kept reinforcing, kept adding support, eventually the structure would hold. There were moments, small ones, where I thought it was working. One time Marcus's car broke down while Daniel was out of town. He called me, not his friends, not a mechanic. Maid. I drove 40 minutes in the rain to pick him up. He didn't say much during the ride, but when we got home he paused before getting out. Thanks, he muttered. It wasn't much. But to me it felt like progress. Like maybe I wasn't just an outsider. And Daniel made me feel like I mattered. He used to leave notes for me on the kitchen counter. Little things, don't forget your lunch, you've got this today. Once he wrote, you make everything stronger. I kept that one. Because coming from a man who knew nothing about engineering, it somehow meant everything. He'd hold me at night and talk about the future like it was something we were building together. This house, he said once, looking around the living room, it's ours, not mine, ours. I believed him. Completely. So when he died, I didn't just lose a person. I lost the one place I thought was structurally sound. The funeral was crowded, more people than I expected, colleagues, old friends, neighbours. Marcus stood beside me the whole time, stiff, distant. He didn't cry. Not once. Afterward at the house, people filled the rooms with noise, whispers, condolences, the clinking of glasses. I felt like I was floating, like none of it was anchored. At some point I ended up alone in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at Daniel's side, still slightly indented like he had just gotten up. That's when Marcus came in. He didn't knock. He stood in the doorway for a moment, then walked in like he owned the place. Which I guess in his mind he did. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was flat, controlled. I wiped my face quickly, trying to steady myself. "Can it wait? Today's been..." "No," he cut me off, "it can't." Something about his tone made my chest tighten. I've seen structural failures before, tiny signs before a collapse, a shift in weight, a sound that doesn't belong. This felt like that. I stood up slowly. "Okay, what is it?" He crossed his arms. "You need to start making arrangements." I blinked. Arrangements. To leave. The word didn't land right, it just hovered. "I'm sorry, what?" "This house," he said, gesturing around like he was already measuring the space, "belongs to my dad, now it's mine." I stared at him. "No," I said, shaking my head slightly, "that's not Daniel and I, this is our home." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's exactly the problem, you think it was yours." My stomach dropped. "Marcus, I've lived here for 8 years. And you were his wife," he said, cutting in again, "not his blood." There it was. Clear, sharp, final. "You're not real family." I felt it physically. Like something inside me gave way. Not a crack. A full collapse. My hands started shaking, my mouth went dry. For a second I couldn't even process the words. I don't understand," I managed. "Daniel would never." "He's not here," Marcus snapped. "And I am, and I'm telling you how this is going to go." Silence filled the room after that. Heavy, suffocating. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "You have 48 hours, he continued, his voice calmer now, almost businesslike. "After that I'll have the locks changed." I just stared at him, waiting for something, a flicker of doubt, a sign this was grief talking. There was nothing. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Not my problem." And then he walked out. Just like that. Like he hadn't just torn the foundation out from under me. I stood there for a long time after he left. Minutes, maybe longer. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor, my back against the bed, staring at the ceiling. In engineering, when something fails, you analyze it. You go back through every calculation, every assumption. You look for where it went wrong. That's what my mind started doing. Had I misunderstood everything? Had Daniel ever actually meant what he said? Was I just a temporary load in a structure that was never designed to hold me? The next morning, reality set in. Marcus didn't speak to me. He moved through the house like I was already gone. I started packing. Not because I believed he was right, but because I didn't know what else to do. Every drawer I opened felt like another piece of my life being dismantled. Clothes, photos, the note Daniel left me, the one that said, "You make everything stronger." I held on to that longer than I should have. By the afternoon of the second day, I had 3 suitcases by the door. I hadn't figured out where I was going yet. A hotel, maybe, temporary housing. Something unstable, something not meant to last. It felt fitting. Marcus came into the living room while I was sitting there, just staring. "You almost done?" he asked. I looked up at him. This person I had tried for years to connect with. This person who now looked at me like I was nothing. Did he ever love me? I asked before I could stop myself. The question surprised both of us. Marcus frowned slightly. What? Your dad, I said. Did he ever talk about me like I mattered? He hesitated. Just for a second. Then his expression hardened again. He married you, didn't he? It wasn't an answer. And somehow that hurt more. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said, he did. Then I stood up. Because there was nothing left to say. I picked up one of my suitcases, the handle cold in my hand, and for a moment I just stood there, looking at the front door. 8 years. Reduced to this. I reached for the knob. And that's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something, instinct maybe, made me answer. Hello. Is this Evelyn Harper? A man's voice asked. Yes. This is Thomas Green, calling from Green and Walters Law. I was your husband's attorney. I froze. Okay. There's a matter regarding Daniel's estate, he continued. We need you to come in. I glanced back at the house. At Marcus. At everything that had just been taken from me. When, I asked. As soon as possible, he said. There are details that need to be addressed, in person. I swallowed. All right, I said quietly. I'll be there. I hung up slowly. Marcus was watching me. What was that? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, I guess we're about to find out what really holds. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something shift. Not hope. Not yet. But something underneath it. Like the beginning of a recalculation. I didn't unpack the suitcases. That's the part I remember most clearly about that night. Not the grief, not even the anger, just the strange, suspended feeling of sitting in a cheap roadside hotel room with 3 packed suitcases lined up against the wall like I was waiting for an inspection. The carpet smelled faintly of bleach and something older, something that never quite leaves. The air conditioner rattled every few minutes like it was trying to hold itself together with loose screws. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the same clothes I'd worn when I walked out of the house, my house, and stared at my phone. Thomas Green, Green and Walters Law. I replayed his voice in my head over and over, like I was trying to reverse engineer it. In my line of work, tone matters. It tells you if something is under stress, if a system is about to fail. He didn't sound casual. He didn't sound like someone calling to confirm paperwork. He sounded deliberate. And that scared me almost as much as everything else. Because deliberate means there's something you don't know yet. And at that point I had already lost so much, I didn't know how much more there was left to take. I barely slept, maybe an hour broken into fragments. Every time I closed my eyes I saw Daniel on the kitchen floor, or Marcus standing in the doorway, arms crossed, telling me I wasn't real. At around 3:17 a.m., I remember checking the clock because I couldn't stand not knowing how much time had passed. I got up and opened one of the suitcases. Not to unpack. Just to look. Inside were pieces of a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. Folded sweaters, a pair of heels I wore to a company dinner last year, a small wooden box where I kept the notes Daniel used to leave me. I opened it. The paper was slightly worn at the edges. I traced the handwriting with my finger. You make everything stronger. For the first time since the funeral, I felt anger rise clean and sharp instead of heavy and dull. Because if that was true, if he really believed that, then how had everything fallen apart this easily? Structures don't just collapse without warning. There are always signs. Unless someone hid them. That thought stayed with me. The next morning I drove to the law office. It was about 25 minutes away, in a part of town Daniel handled most of the paperwork for, finances, insurance, all of it. I trusted him with those things the same way I trusted a well-tested design, completely. The building itself was exactly what you'd expect. Neutral, clean, glass doors, beige walls, everything designed to feel stable without drawing attention. I parked, sat in the car for a moment, and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked older. Not in years, in weight. Like something had settled into me overnight. Okay, I said out loud, because sometimes hearing your own voice helps anchor you. You deal with problems, that's what you do. Then I got out of the car. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a polite, practiced smile. Ms. Harper. I nodded. Mr. Green is expecting you. Of course he was. She led me down a hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the kind of smell that comes from too many documents and too many decisions being made in one place. When she opened the door to his office, I wasn't expecting to see Marcus already sitting there. But he was, leaning back slightly in his chair, one ankle resting on his knee like he had every right to be comfortable. He didn't look surprised to see me. That was my first clue that something about this meeting wasn't what I thought. You're here, he said, like it was an inconvenience more than anything else. I ignored him. Thomas Green stood from behind his desk and extended his hand. He was in his early 60s, I guessed. Grey hair, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that told you he'd spent decades dealing with conflict and knew how to stay steady in the middle of it. Evelyn, he said, thank you for coming. His handshake was firm, grounded. I needed that more than I expected. Of course, I replied. You said there were details regarding Daniel's estate. He gestured for me to sit. I chose the chair opposite Marcus. Not next to him. Not anymore. Yes, Green said, sitting back down and folding his hands on the desk. There are some clarifications that need to be addressed before anything moves forward. Marcus shifted slightly. What kind of clarifications? He asked. His tone was controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. Impatience. Green glanced at him briefly, then back at me. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that both of you understand the situation as it currently stands. I frowned slightly. I was told, I said slowly, that Daniel's estate, specifically the house, was being transferred to Marcus. Marcus gave a short nod. That's right. Green didn't confirm it. He just looked at me for a moment, like he was measuring something. And how did you come to that understanding? He asked. I blinked. Marcus told me, I said. There was a pause. A small one. But in that pause something shifted. Green leaned back slightly in his chair. I see. Marcus straightened a little. Look, we don't need to drag this out. My dad's will is clear, the house is mine. She was living there, sure, but... That is not entirely accurate, Green said calmly. The room went still. Marcus frowned. What? Green opened a folder on his desk. I watched his hands, steady, precise, like someone who understood the weight of what he was about to do. There is a will on file, he said. Yes, the one you're referring to, Marcus. Marcus relaxed slightly. Exactly. But, Green continued, lifting a document from the folder, it is not the only one. Silence. I felt my heartbeat start to pick up again. Not fast. Not panicked. Just alert. Like something structural was being tested. Marcus let out a small laugh. What does that mean? It means, Green said, his voice even, that approximately 8 months before his passing, Daniel filed an updated will. I stopped breathing for a second. 8 months. That wasn't long ago. That wasn't before me. That was during us asterisk. Marcus's expression hardened. That's not possible, he would have told me. Green didn't react to that. He simply placed the document on the desk. I assure you, he said, it is both possible and legally valid. I felt something inside me shift again. Not collapse. Recalibration. Because if there was a second will, then everything Marcus said, the certainty, the authority, it wasn't solid. It was assumed. And assumptions are where structures fail. I'd like to review it, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. Green nodded. Of course. He slid the document across the desk. For a second, I didn't reach for it. My hands felt strange, like they didn't belong to me. Then I forced myself to move. Paper, ink, signatures. Daniel's name at the bottom. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My throat tightened. I skimmed the first few lines, trying to process the legal language, the formal structure. But then my eyes caught something. Aligned. Clear, direct. The property located at our address shall remain in full ownership of my wife, Evelyn Harper. But the words didn't make sense at first. Like they were written in a language I should understand, but suddenly couldn't. I read it again. Slower. Full ownership. My vision blurred slightly. Wait, Marcus said sharply. That's not what are you talking about? Green didn't answer him. He was watching me, probably waiting to see if I understood. I looked up. This says the house is mine, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere else. Marcus leaned forward. Let me see that. Green held up a hand. You will have a chance to review it, but I suggest you allow Evelyn to finish first. Marcus clenched his jaw. I kept reading. There were other details, financial accounts, distributions, but they blurred together. Because one thing stood out. One thing that mattered more than anything else in that moment. Daniel had changed his will. And he had done it recently. And he had chosen me. I felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain. Not exactly. Something sharper. Something that had been buried under everything Marcus said. You're not real family. My hands tightened slightly on the paper. Because this document said something very different. Is there anything else? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Green's expression shifted slightly. Not pity. Something closer to respect. Yes, he said. He reached back into the folder and pulled out another item. Not a legal document. An envelope. Cream-colored, slightly worn. My name written on the front. In Daniel's handwriting. For a second, the room disappeared. It was just me and that envelope. This, Green said carefully, was included with the updated will. It is addressed to you specifically. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. I didn't look at Marcus. I didn't care what his reaction was in that moment. Because whatever was inside that envelope, it was something Daniel had left for me. Something he hadn't said out loud. Something he knew I would need. I ran my thumb along the edge, feeling the slight resistance before it gave way. And as I opened it, I realized this wasn't just about property, or ownership, or winning. This was about the truth. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I was about to hear it. The paper inside the envelope was folded twice. I remember that detail vividly, because my hands paused on that second fold like I was standing at the edge of something irreversible. In engineering, there's always a moment before failure, or before stability, where you know whatever happens next will define everything that follows. That's what that fold felt like. Finaled. I unfolded it slowly. The room was silent, not just quiet, waiting. Even Marcus didn't say anything. I could feel his attention shift like pressure building in a closed system. The handwriting was unmistakably Daniel's, slightly slanted, a little uneven in places. He always wrote like he was thinking faster than his hand could keep up. Evelyn, it began. And just like that, my throat closed. Because I hadn't seen my name in his handwriting since before he died. Not like this, not intentional, not final. I forced myself to keep reading. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the time I thought I would. A sharp breath caught in my chest. That line alone told me something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. He knew asterisk. Maybe not exactly when or how, but he knew something wasn't right. And suddenly, every small complaint he brushed off, every time he said he was just tired, they rearranged themselves in my mind like pieces of a structure I had miscalculated. I want you to understand something clearly, the letter continued. You are not temporary, you are not secondary, you are not something that happened after my real life. You are my life. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, but it didn't help. Because those words, they directly contradicted everything Marcus had thrown at me. You're not real family. My fingers tightened around the paper. I know Marcus has struggled with you, Daniel wrote. That is my failure, not yours. I spent too long trying to keep peace instead of building truth. That line hit differently. Because that asterisk, that was something I understood. In engineering, you can't design around a flaw forever. You can reinforce it, disguise it, redistribute load, but eventually, if you don't address the core issue, it fails. Daniel had tried to balance something that couldn't be balanced, and I had been part of that system. I see the way you try, the letter continued. The dinners, the patience, the way you stay when it would be easier to walk away. You think I don't notice, but I do, every single time. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Because for years, I wasn't sure he asterisk did notice. Not fully. Not enough to change anything. I didn't protect you the way I should have, he wrote, and if anything happens to me, I need to make sure you are protected from the consequences of my silence. The words felt heavy, intentional, like they had been weighed carefully before being written. I updated my will because I know what Marcus will do. He believes blood is the only thing that defines family. I tried to change that. I don't know if I succeeded. At that, I heard Marcus shift in his chair. A small, sharp movement. But I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I am leaving the house to you, Daniel continued. Not as a gift, but as recognition. You built that home with me, you made it stronger. You made asterisk me stronger. That word again. Stronger. It echoed through me differently now. Not as something soft or comforting, but as something acknowledged asterisk. Measured. Reeled. You deserve stability, he wrote. Not uncertainty, not eviction from a life you helped create. My breathing grew uneven, because those were the exact words Marcus had turned into reality. Eviction. Removal. Erasure. I know this will cause conflict, the letter said, and I am sorry for that, but avoiding conflict is what created this situation in the first place. That line felt like a quiet confession. Not dramatic, not defensive. Just true. I am asking you, not as a request, but as something you owe yourself. Do not let anyone redefine your place in this family. My hands started shaking again. But this time it wasn't from shock. It was something else. Something steadier. I loved you, the letter ended. Fully, not partially, not conditionally. Don't let anyone make you doubt that after I'm gone. There was no signature. Just his name. Daniel. Simple. Final. I didn't realize I had stopped breathing until my chest tightened. I inhaled sharply, folding the letter back slowly, carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. The room came back into focus in pieces. The desk, the walls, green watching me quietly. Marcus wasn't leaning back anymore. He was sitting forward now, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the paper in my hands. What does it say? He asked. His voice was different. Not confident. Not controlled. Tight. I looked at him for the first time since I started reading. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see authority. I saw uncertainty. You should read it yourself, I said. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. It didn't break. It held. Green nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. He reached for the letter gently. I'll allow both parties to review it, he said, then handed it to Marcus. Marcus took it quickly, too quickly. Like speed could change what was written. He read in silence at first, then slower. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved back over certain lines. Again, and again. This doesn't change anything, he said suddenly. But his voice didn't match the words. It was strained. It does, Green said calmly. Marcus looked up sharply. No, it doesn't. This is just something he wrote, the original will. Is superseded by the updated one, Green interrupted, still calm, still steady, which has been properly signed, witnessed and filed. Marcus stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. No, he said, shaking his head. No, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't just give everything to her. Everything. That word caught my attention. Not everything, Green clarified, but the house, yes, as clearly stated. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, pecking now. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. He would have told me. I felt something shift inside me again. Because that sentence, it sounded familiar. Like something I had told myself for years. If something was wrong, he would have said something. If Marcus really had a problem, it would have come out. But silence doesn't mean absence. It means avoidance. He didn't tell you, I said quietly, because he knew how you'd react. Marcus stopped packing. He looked at me like he was seeing me differently for the first time. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I said, standing up slowly, that this isn't new, this isn't sudden, this is just the first time you're being told no. The word hung there. No. Simple, structural, final. Marcus scoffed. You think this changes who you are. You think a piece of paper makes you family. There it was again. The same line. The same fracture point. But this time, it didn't hit the same. No, I said, it doesn't. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. It doesn't make me family, I continued. It proves I already was. Silence. Not the heavy, suffocating kind from before. This was different. This was settled. Like something had finally locked into place. Marcus looked at Green. There has to be something we can do, contest it, challenge it. Green folded his hands again. You are within your legal rights to contest the will, he said. However, I must advise you that the documentation is strong, very strong. Marcus exhaled sharply. Anger, frustration, disbelief. All of it cycling through him like a system under stress. This is insane, he said. She was just someone he married. I felt it again. That old sting. But it didn't land the same way. Because now, I had evidence. Not just words. Not just memories. Proof. I was the person who stayed, I said quietly. That's not just anything. Marcus didn't respond. Because there wasn't a counter-argument to that. Not one that held. Green glanced between us. I suggest, he said carefully, that both of you take some time before making any further decisions. This is a significant development. Significant. That was one way to put it. I picked up my bag slowly. My movements felt different now. More deliberate. Less reactive. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I wasn't trying to hold something together that had already collapsed. I was rebuilding. From a new foundation. As I turned to leave, Marcus spoke again. This isn't over, he said. I paused. Looked back at him. No, I said, it's not. But I didn't say it like a threat. Or a warning. Just a fact. Because rebuilding takes time. And this was only the beginning. I didn't go back to the hotel right away after leaving the lawyer's office. I sat in my car for a long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, the letter folded carefully in my bag like something fragile and alive. The engine was off, but I could still hear a faint ticking sound, metal cooling, adjusting. Even machines need time to recalibrate after stress. So do people. For the first time since Daniel died, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what had been hidden. That's a different kind of weight, heavier but clearer, like discovering a flaw in a structure you trusted. It hurts, but at least now you understand where the failure started. Daniel knew. That was the part I couldn't stop circling back to. He knew Marcus would try to push me out. He knew the exact shape of the collapse that would follow his absence, and instead of confronting it while he was alive, he designed around it. A second will, a letter, a delayed truth. Part of me understood it. Conflict avoidance is a quiet kind of weakness, the kind that feels like kindness until it breaks something. But another part of me, the part that spent years trying to earn a place, that part was angry. Not at Marcus, at Daniel, because he saw it all and still left me to face it alone. I pressed my forehead lightly against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. Why didn't you just say it? I whispered. The car, of course, didn't answer. And neither would he. That's the thing about finality. There are no revisions, no late corrections. Just consequences. Eventually I straightened up, started the engine and drove. Not to the hotel. To the house. I didn't tell Marcus I was coming. I didn't call. I didn't ask permission. Because something had shifted. For days I had been reacting like a structure under sudden load, trying not to fail. But now I had information, documentation, proof. And in my profession, once you have data, you stop guessing. You act. The house looked exactly the same when I pulled into the driveway. That almost made it worse. Same porch, same windows, the same small crack in the concrete step Daniel kept saying he'd fix next weekend. Everything intact. As if nothing had happened. But I knew better now. Just because something looks stable doesn't mean it is. I grabbed my bag, stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. My key still worked. For a second I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because I was aware of the moment, like stepping onto a bridge you helped build after someone tried to tell you it would never hold your weight. Then I unlocked the door and walked in. Marcus was in the living room. Of course he was. He looked up immediately, his expression tightening the second he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. I closed the door behind me calmly. "I live here." The words felt strange at first. Not uncertain. Just newly solid. Marcus let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "We already went over this." "No," I said, cutting him off. That alone surprised him. We had a pattern before. He pushed, I absorbed. He spoke, I adjusted. "Not anymore." "We went over what you thought was true," I continued. "That changed." He stood up slowly, tension building in his posture. "You think that letter means you can just walk back in here like nothing happened?" "It's not the letter," I said. "It's the will." He scoffed. "I'm contesting it." "That's your choice." I walked past him toward the hallway. Not rushing, not defensive. Just moving. Because this wasn't about proving something anymore. It was about occupying space I had already earned. "Evelyn," he snapped. I stopped, turned back slightly. "What?" His jaw clenched. "You really think this is going to work, that you can just take everything?" That word again. Everything. I shook my head. "I'm not taking anything," I said. "I'm staying where I already was." "There's a difference. A critical one. In engineering, you don't steal load from a structure. You redistribute it where it was always supposed to go." Marcus didn't respond right away. I could see it in his face, the recalculation, the shift from certainty to strategy. "Fine," he said finally. "You stay for now, but this isn't over." "I know," I replied. And I meant it. Because conflict like this doesn't resolve cleanly. It doesn't just disappear. It evolves. The next few days were tense. That's the simplest way to put it. We existed in the same space like opposing forces in a system that hadn't stabilized yet. Conversations were minimal, movements were careful. Measured. I started unpacking slowly. Not all at once, not like I was reclaiming territory. More like I was re-establishing presence. One drawer, one shelf, one corner of the closet. Every small action felt significant. Because this wasn't just about things. It was about identity. Marcus made a few calls. I heard him in the other room, voice low but sharp, words like contest, lawyer, unfair drifting through the walls. I didn't interrupt. Because this wasn't a fight I needed to escalate emotionally. It was already defined legally. And emotionally, I had something he didn't. Closure. Not complete, not perfect. But real. One evening, maybe 4 days after the lawyer's office, I found myself in the kitchen again. Same space where everything had started. Same tile floor. Same cabinet where the coffee mugs were kept. I stood there for a long moment, just existing in it. Then I opened the cabinet, took out a mug and made coffee. It felt like reclaiming something small but essential. Marcus walked in halfway through. He paused when he saw me. There was a strange moment, almost like recognition, that we hadn't had since before Daniel died. "You're really staying," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not leaving." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. For once there wasn't immediate hostility. Just something more complicated. "You think this is what he wanted?" he asked. I looked at him. Really looked this time. Because beneath the anger, beneath the entitlement, there was something else. Loss. Misplaced, misunderstood. But still there. "I know it is," I said. He shook his head slightly. "He didn't even tell me." "That doesn't mean he didn't mean it." That hit something. I could see it. A small crack. "Why?" he asked, quieter now. "Why you?" There it was. Not accusation. Not fully. Just confusion. And for the first time, I didn't feel defensive answering him. "Because I stayed," I said. Simple. True. He frowned slightly. "So did I." I nodded. "Yes," I said, "but not in the same way." Silence stretched between us. Not hostile. Just heavy with things neither of us fully understood yet. "I'm still contesting it," he said eventually. "I know. And if I win..." "If you win," I interrupted gently, "then we deal with that when it happens." That's how I approach every structural uncertainty. You don't design for panic. You design for possibility. He exhaled sharply, pushing himself off the counter. "This isn't over," he repeated. I didn't argue. Because he was right. But for the first time, that didn't scare me. That night I sat in the living room alone. The house felt different now. Not quieter. Not emptier. Just recalibrated. I took the letter out again, reading it more slowly this time. Not searching for answers. Just absorbing. "You made everything stronger." I used to think that meant I was supposed to hold everything together. Now I understood something different. Strength isn't about Arabic ta, Arabic het, Arabic meme, Arabic lam, everything. It's about knowing what you're allowed to carry and what you're not. Marcus's anger. Not mine to carry. Daniel's silence. Not mine to fix. For years, I had tried to be the reinforcement in a system that was never designed properly. Now, I was redesigning. And that meant making choices that prioritized stability, not approval. A week later, Green called again. There would be a formal reading, documentation review, next steps. Marcus had already filed initial paperwork to contest. Of course he had. I agreed to attend, not because I needed validation anymore, but because I was done being passive in my own life. The day of the meeting, I didn't feel nervous. That surprised me. I wore a simple navy dress, professional, clean lines, structured. The kind of outfit that feels like an extension of how you think. Controlled. Intentional. When I arrived, Marcus was already there. This time he didn't look confident. He looked prepared for a fight he wasn't sure he'd win. Green greeted us both, then began going over the documentation again. Legal language, dates, signatures. Everything aligned. Everything held. Like a structure built correctly the first time. Marcus's lawyer tried to question intent, timing, influence. But Green responded to each point with calm precision. Evidence. Clarity. Stability. It reminded me of presenting a design under scrutiny when you know your calculations are sound. There's a certain calm that comes with that. Not arrogance. Just certainty. After nearly 2 hours, the conclusion was clear. The updated will stood. Marcus's challenge would require far more than speculation to succeed. And even his lawyer seemed to understand that. When we stepped outside afterward, the air felt lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because the foundation was set. Marcus stopped near his car. I paused a few steps away. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't think he'd do that." I nodded. "I know." He looked at me. Really looked this time. Not as an obstacle. Not as an outsider. Just as someone who had been part of something he didn't fully understand. "I still don't agree with it," he added. "You don't have to. That's something I've learned the hard way. Agreement isn't required for truth to exist." He exhaled slowly. "I need time," he said. I nodded again. "Take it. Because healing, real healing, isn't immediate. It's structural. Layered. Built over time." He got into his car without another word. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel like I was standing in opposition to him. Just separate. And sometimes that's enough. I drove home. Not the hotel. Home. And when I walked through the door, it didn't feel like reclaiming something anymore. It felt like continuing. Not the same life. Not the same structure. But something rebuilt. Stronger. Not because it never broke. But because now I understood exactly where the weak points had been. The strange thing about winning something you didn't even know you were fighting for is that it doesn't feel like victory. At least not the way people imagine it. There was no moment where everything clicked into place and I suddenly felt whole again. No dramatic sense of justice served. No clean emotional resolution where all the pain just evaporated. What I got instead was quieter. Heavier in some ways. But real. Marcus didn't move out right away. That's something I think a lot of people would expect, that after the lawyer confirmed everything, after it became clear the will would stand, he'd just leave, angry, defeated, done. But life doesn't resolve like that. People don't. He stayed for another 3 weeks. We moved around each other like two people learning a new language neither of us wanted to speak. There were no more explosive arguments, no more threats. Just distance. Measured, controlled, careful. It reminded me of working around a damaged structure that's still standing. You don't tear it down immediately. You assess. You adjust your movements. You avoid putting pressure where you know the weakness is. That's what those weeks felt like. Avoidance as a form of survival. But something had changed in him. Not completely, not dramatically. Just subtly. One morning, I found him in the garage. He was going through some of Daniel's old tools, sorting them into boxes, some labeled, some not. For a second, I just stood there in the doorway, watching. There was a time when I would have hesitated to step into that space. It always felt like his territory, a place I wasn't fully invited into. But that feeling wasn't there anymore. So I walked in. Organizing, I asked. He glanced up, then nodded. Yes. His voice wasn't sharp, just tired. I leaned lightly against the wall, looking at the workbench Daniel used to spend hours at. I didn't know he kept this much, I said. Marcus gave a small, almost humorless smile. He kept everything. That was true. Daniel was the kind of man who believed in fixing things instead of replacing them, in holding on to parts because you never know when you'll need them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Marcus said he used to let me help him in here when I was a kid. I looked at him. There was something different in his tone. Not defensive, not guarded, just remembering. What did you build? I asked. He shrugged slightly. Nothing that worked. I smiled faintly. That's how it starts. That got a small breath of laughter out of him. Not much, but enough. I thought he hesitated, then shook his head. Never mind. What? He exhaled slowly. I thought if I stayed close to him, if I did things his way, I'd always have a place here. There it was. The core stress point. Not anger. Not entitlement. Fear. Of being replaced. Of being less. I understood that more than I wanted to admit. I thought the same thing, I said quietly. He looked at me surprised. You? I nodded. For years. We stood there in that shared understanding, two people who had been trying to secure something that was never meant to be conditional in the first place. That letter, he said after a moment, did he really write all that? Yes. Marcus looked down at the tools in his hands. He never said any of that to me. I know. There wasn't anything else to add to that. Because that was the truth. Daniel loved us both. But he didn't communicate that love in a way that held under pressure. And that failure, it shaped everything that came after. A few days later, Marcus moved out. No argument, no dramatic goodbye. Just boxes, a rented truck, and a quiet kind of finality. I stood on the porch while he loaded the last of his things. At one point he paused, looking back at the house. This place, he said, trailing off. I know, I replied. He nodded slowly. I'm still figuring out how I feel about all of this. That's fair. He hesitated, then added, I meant what I said before, I don't agree with the will. I know. But he shifted his weight slightly. I don't think you're nothing. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was something. And sometimes something is enough to build on. Thank you, I said. He gave a short nod, then got into the truck. And just like that, he was gone. The house felt different after that. Not empty. Not quiet in that suffocating way from before. Just open. Like a space that finally had room to breathe. I didn't rush to change anything. That's something I've learned in my work. After a structural shift, you don't immediately rebuild everything. You observe, you understand the new load distribution. You let things settle. So I kept Daniel's chair where it was, left the kitchen mostly unchanged. But slowly, over time, I made adjustments. I repainted the bedroom. Reorganized the living room. Not to erase him, but to reflect me. Because for years, I had adapted myself to fit into a space that never fully acknowledged me. Now, I was allowed to design it differently. Financially, the stability helped more than I expected. The house was fully mine, no mortgage left. Daniel had taken care of that years ago. There were also savings, accounts I hadn't even realized were structured to include me. Green walked me through everything over a few meetings. Carefully, thoroughly. Like explaining a system you want someone to understand, not just use. You're secure, he said at one point. Secure. That word hit differently now. Not just financially. Emotionally. Because security isn't just about what you have. It's about knowing it can't be taken from you arbitrarily. For the first time in a long time, I felt that. But here's the part no one really talks about. Revenge, if that's what you want to call it, doesn't feel like satisfaction. Watching Marcus lose his claim, seeing him realize he couldn't force me out, it didn't bring me joy. It brought clarity. Because the truth is, he didn't lose anything that was ever fully his. And I didn't gain anything I hadn't already helped build. The only thing that changed was that it was finally acknowledged. And that acknowledgement mattered more than any legal document. Months passed. Life settled into something new. Not better. Not worse. Just honest. One evening, maybe 6 months after everything, I found myself back in the kitchen again. It seems like everything important in my life happens there. The light was softer this time, late afternoon, golden. I made coffee not because I needed it, but because I wanted the routine. The familiarity. I leaned against the counter, mug in hand, and looked around. Same space. Same structure. But it felt different. Not because of what was there, but because of how I stood in it. There was no hesitation anymore. No quiet question of asterisk, do I belong here? I did. Not because someone said so. Not because a will confirmed it. But because I had finally stopped asking for permission. I walked into the living room and sat down, pulling the letter from the drawer where I kept it now. I don't read it every day. I don't need to. But sometimes it helps to remember. I loved you fully. I used to read that line searching for reassurance. Now I read it as information. Something that existed, regardless of what came after. Love doesn't always hold structures together. Sometimes it's poorly communicated, misaligned, incomplete. But that doesn't make it unreal. It just makes it human. If you're reading this, maybe you felt something similar. Like you've been standing in a space that should be yours, but somehow is. Like you've spent years trying to reinforce something that keeps shifting under you. Hear what I've learned. You can't build stability on someone else's uncertainty. You can't force yourself into a structure that was never designed to hold you. And most importantly, you don't need unanimous agreement to claim your place. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't fighting. It's staying. Quietly, firmly, without apology. Other times, it's walking away. But either way, the choice has to be yours. Not something handed to you. Not something taken from you. Something you decide. Tonight, I opened the windows for the first time in a while. Let the air move through the house. It carried that faint smell of rain coming, even though the sky was still clear. I stood there for a while just listening. Not for silence, but for balance. And for the first time since everything broke, everything felt like it was holding,